So I'm going to start recording. Yeah, so like I mentioned, today we'll talk about designing, we'll talk about ideating, we'll talk about prototyping and testing designs for users. As a quick review, you've seen this many times already. We're still talking about the computational action process, which is cyclical. So we discussed problem finding, we discussed user research yesterday. Today we'll talk about ethical design and prototyping. So before I jump in, I'd love to ask folks here, what do you think ethical design means? What does that mean to you, ethical design? Does anyone, any volunteers? Anyone want to put anything in the chat? Raise your hand. Yeah, Kumar? Is that how you pronounce it?
Sorry, it's Ashmita. I forgot to change.
Oh, sorry, Shmita. Yeah, go ahead.
I think ethical design probably means keeping the user's best interests in mind. So especially if you're handling sensitive information or something personal, you need to make sure that you're abiding by the law and keeping their making it secure for the user in terms of what gets shared, what gets distributed, and how the app uses their information.
Yeah, I love that answer. You're really thinking about data security and privacy and all of these needs potentially from the user. That's great. We talk a lot about ethics, especially in tech and in AI, and that's like a massive topic these days. I'm very passionate about that myself. Happy to discuss more in office hours with anyone who's interested. That's a wonderful answer, Shmita. Is it Dia?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I agree with a lot of what Ashmita just said, but just to add on that, I think ethical design also has to do with making sure that it addresses everyone, or maybe just the intended audience, but in a way that it doesn't negatively overlook certain groups, and making sure that it's not able to, and like Lily said in the chat, using ethical and inclusive data to making sure that your product doesn't end up overlooking something that ends up hurting certain groups of people.
Yeah, thank you so much. You guys are so on top of it. I love these answers. Yes, like you mentioned, inclusive data. I think Lily also mentioned that in the chat. Not hurting people with your product decisions. These are all amazing answers. And you basically hit it right on the head of what the idea of ethical design is. Really thinking about being as beneficent as possible to users. What we mean by that is not hurting them. You're trying to produce products that are beneficial to them, right? So this is really, really core to the idea of computational action, because as you're doing your projects for the Create-a-thon, our goals and your goals for your projects to have a good impact on people, in your community or the users that you're designing your project for, right? So thinking about ethics and thinking about how to benefit users and not harm them is a massive part of having good impact and creating products that are socially impactful. So how do we start thinking about ethics? Well, I will introduce you to a great nifty tool called the Ethical Matrix. And this is really a tool to help you make sure your product is ethical, really a tool to help you engage in ethical design. And really the idea here is to both understand the stakeholders and the values of these stakeholders. Does anyone know what I mean when I say stakeholders? Can anyone share out what that means to you? Yeah, Shmita?
I know a stakeholder is probably someone who has an interest in the product that you're designing. Sometimes that's investing in that product. Sometimes it's the users that you're thinking about of the product, but yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. For the sake of time, or actually, Sahana, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think she got most of it, but I think in inclusion, stakeholders are people who might typically be underserved or overlooked by certain products.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, thank you for adding that. Yeah, basically you covered it exactly. Stakeholders, generally what this term means is someone who's affected or someone who has a stake in something. So when we talk about our tech product or the app you're building, a stakeholder is someone who would be affected or has an interest or stake in your product. And then values here, so we're talking about sort of like what's important to the stakeholders, right? You might have heard the term of values like moral values or life values. You might have heard these ideas or these terms just generally. What we mean here by values is what's important to stakeholders, right? What values do they hold very highly? So in this ethical matrix, so basically you can use this to think about your product and list out stakeholders of your product and also important values that are generally important to the stakeholders. So I'll walk you through an example, and then in your teams, if you have a theme or an idea, this is a great chance to start brainstorming because it really is helpful to keep this in mind at the beginning before you start actually creating a product. It's never too early to basically incorporate and think about ethical design and being ethical as you ideate and as you create your product. So as an example, I'll walk you through, this example that I've been using is a mental well-being app for young people. I think like Ashmita mentioned, there might be, I'm sorry, I'm going through my slides. Okay, there might be many different types of stakeholders, right? It might be investors, might be the users. One really key stakeholder to not forget is yourself, the team making the product, right? As the developer or the creator of the product, you're invested in the product, right? So that's oftentimes a key stakeholder that we might forget, but important to remember that you are also a key stakeholder. So for this example, I put in the direct user, right? The users of your product, your intended target audience is a great stakeholder to keep in mind. In this example, because they're young people, I thought about the indirect users, i.e. the parents, right? Family. If your app is for people who have pets, could be their friends who engage with them, engage with the pets, right? So start, thinking outside the box a little bit about all the potential stakeholders or people who have an interest in your product. And like I mentioned, the team making the product, right, the developers. There could be other things, right? If you think about a physical product, you could have manufacturers, you could have people who work in factories, you could have the designers. I think Ashmita mentioned earlier, investors, right? People who are putting money into the product. There could be many other types of stakeholders. I list a few more in your guide doc, but it's a really interesting exercise here to try to think outside the box of who are all the people who could be affected. Because as you think about the bigger kind of the gamut of people, of stakeholders you think about, the more likely it is that you won't forget someone and you'll be inclusive and be able to make more ethical decisions. So values, what about values? Can anyone name any kind of particular values you think might be important to these stakeholders in this topic of a mental well-being app? You can shout out, you can write in the chat. What are some values that you think are important to users or other stakeholders?
Maybe confidentiality.
Yeah, definitely. So data privacy, right? Confidentiality, we talked about it a little bit earlier. I absolutely agree. Anyone else? Anything else you can think of that might be important? Actually, I think I had that as privacy. Yeah, so some other things in general could be related to confidentiality, safety, right? So privacy and safety often go hand in hand. Security, these are slightly nuanced, different topics, but they're often talked about, especially when we talk about tech products these days. These are top of mind. What about fun, right? So it's not just the maybe more, more heavy, more like topics with gravity. As a user of an app, how do you like it if an app is more fun or boring, right? So like fun easy to use, usability is actually, usually like core values that people using a product want from that product, right? Not always, but in this case, I felt like it was actually a pretty important value for this app because it's really targeted here towards young people. Some other things could be like the effectiveness of the app. Accessibility could be another top value. If your app is supposed to be making money, or if your product is supposed to be making money, profitability, simplicity. I mentioned ease of use earlier. These are some top common values that are, often we kind of think about these values when we think about apps and products. So I kind of listed that here. And this is by no means prescriptive, but this is just a way to get you to start thinking about what are the stakeholders for your product and what are their top values. And how we fill out the ethical matrix is you go row by row for stakeholders and you put a check mark on the values most important to them. So here it's important to base this off of the user research that you did, that we talked about yesterday, right? So from understanding the users, you can, check off what is most important to them. So make sure not to assume, but base this off of the data that you have. Of course, if you're checking off something for yourself, right, the developer or the team, you can interrogate yourself. You can talk to your team members about what's important for you. So in this example, I put down for the direct user of the app, what's most important to them is that they have they're engaged, they have a fun time in this well-being app, and it also works for them. As a parent, they were really mostly concerned that the app was being private, was not sharing data, and also that it works well for the young person. And then as a developer or the team making the product, generally, like all of these are super highly important, right? Like you can also kind of make decisions about what's most important. It's generally good to try to be really specific about what's the most important value, because all these values are probably going to be applicable to every stakeholder. But you really want to get out what is their top need, and that'll really help you make better decisions. Because if everything is checked off for everyone, and you might not have as nuanced understanding of what's most important for your different stakeholders, for your users. Cool. Does that make sense? Any questions so far as we talk about the ethical matrix? Okay, awesome. Oh, I see Lily wrote in the chat, trust with user and creators. That's wonderful. That's a great one. Trust is an absolutely awesome value. Cool. Okay, so I am going to ask you to just try it out. I'm going to break you out into your teams today and not the sister teams. Just have a quick 3-minute chat. We will, you don't have to, like, if you don't know your exact product, you can talk about that. But try to talk about, what are some, like, if you have an idea, since you already have your themes, what are some, top values to take into consideration? What are some of the top stakeholders that you're already thinking about for your product? Any questions before I open breakout rooms? No? Okay, all good, cool. So this will be really quick. I opened up the rooms, so you should be able to select, or sorry, actually, 1 second. Let me make sure you can select the teams. Okay, yes, okay, there we go. So you can select the team that you're on, make sure you know your team member. This should be really fast, so let's just have a really quick chat because there's a lot of material to go through today. Awesome. Okay, so, and if you see someone in the main room who isn't moving to your team, let me know. We can help you move to the right breakout room. So again, this is 3-minute chat. Try to be, I'm gonna try to have a good conversation about this, and then I'll reconvene everyone at 12:55 so we can move on to the rest. All right, how's everyone looking at the breakout rooms? All right, so good design. So we talk about ethical design, and really, I think this is a very topical conversation these days. Whenever we talk about design, really thinking about what everyone shared, being inclusive, making ethical decisions, being aware of user trust and privacy. It's so important to good design. I also love to share something from a while ago. So this is the mid 1900s. Dieter Rams was a pretty foundational industrial designer. He founded the company, the German company Braun, which you might know for like household appliances and things like that. And he made 10 principles of good design, which I really like because they're quite simple, but they are very powerful. So you can read through here, right? He says good design is innovative, makes a product useful, is aesthetic, makes a product understandable, is unobtrusive. I actually really like is honest. It's pretty simple, but it can have really deep meaning. And the last one involves as little design as possible. So I think these 10 principles really encapsulate a lot of when we think about product design. There are different elements of design, and today I'm going to be mostly talking about product design, which is a little different from something like graphic design or other. Design is such a massive field, and there's so many interesting aspects of different designs. But since we're talking about designing apps and products in computational action, I'm going to be focusing on product design. So what's really cool, some of you might be too young to know this, but in this diagram here on the right-hand side, under 2001, that's actually the first iPod. And then under 1958 is actually a radio that Dieter Rams designed in the mid 1900s. So actually the lead designer, Johnny Ives of a lot of Apple products, I think he's since left Apple, but he was really foundational in the creation of the iPod, the iPhone. He was greatly influenced by Dieter Rams, and you can tell just from the simplicity and the function of a lot of Apple products, the influence, and you can really tell the influence of these 10 principles of good design in a lot of Apple products. So this is by no means an ad for Apple, but I do want to point out that it's a popular, they're popular products for good reason, right, in the world. And actually, if you interrogate where a lot of those designs come from, they really stay true to a lot of these 10 principles of good design. I put some more links for Dieter Rams and design principles and some examples in the guide doc. So if you're interested in design, I suggest you go and look through that, do your own research. And I also highly suggest you observe around you products, either physical or software products that you really enjoy, or products that really annoy you. Try to, really be mindful of what it is about these products that maybe they follow some of these aspects of some of these principles of good design. Maybe they don't follow it. Yesterday we talked a little bit about door handles, right, and good UI UX. Good design and annoying design is all around us. And really being observant of all that around you can go a long way in making good product, in helping you yourself make good product. In fact, this is what I did a lot during my years, in school and then afterwards working. I was just really interested in design, and I was keenly aware of it around my life and how other people designed objects that I was using or apps I was using. And it really helped me develop a great product intuition. Really helped me empathize too with users. So I highly suggest you just think about trying this out in your life. So we'll move on to the core thing that we'll talk about today, which is sketching and designs. Before I go, are there any questions before I start this? Okay. Please feel free to shout out or write if there's any questions. So low fidelity versus high fidelity. I really want to emphasize to you that as we talk about sketching and design, it's a really, really helpful thing to start low and go high. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean to start as low fidelity or as simple with sketches, as quick as you can, and then move into higher quality or high fidelity designs. Does anyone know why this might be the case? why do I strongly emphasize to you that we start with sketches first instead of moving, into the really detailed, fine drawings or designs? Yeah, Ashmita.
It helps you get that overall concept of what you want to create without all of the embellishments so that you can focus on getting it to work first, and then you can focus on like all of the complicated design part, because that will take a really long time. So as long as you stay true to the original design, you would be fine.
Yeah, I love what you said. Go get the overall concept down first. Absolutely. Yeah, I see in the chat, because we might need to implement big changes. Absolutely. Moving without a plan may be difficult. Measure twice, cut once. I like that. So yeah, I think you guys have all got it, really accurately. Really creating high fidelity designs. It makes sense, right? You think about creating high quality designs, it's going to take a lot more time. So if we start out and you kind of thinking, maybe I'll cut some time, I'll cut out the sketches, go straight into creating the high quality, high fidelity designs to save time, actually it's usually going to backfire. So I strongly suggest always start with sketches. And in this way, like Ashmita said, you can really get the big concepts through to make sure you're following your big ideas, not getting distracted by details, and also save a ton of time as you're going through this process. So real designers definitely do this. One way of maybe remembering it is KISS, keep it simple. Some people say stupid, some people say silly. I'll let you fill in your word of choice. So KISS, keep it simple, right? By starting small. You can see here, if you look up sketch designs, apps, or things like that, tons of examples of different people sketching apps. What I highly recommend you do is use the 80-20 rule. So this is 80% of the use cases, right? So draw out, sketch out, and test with real people the main use cases of your app, right? Or in other words, the MVP, right? The minimal stuff that makes your app do what it does. The 20% cases, there's probably going to be a ton of use cases that are edge cases that might happen sometimes, maybe some little tricky things with menus. Those aren't the key things of what your app is doing, right? So when you're sketching, especially, make sure to test the main use cases and get feedback on whether that makes sense or not. How do you get feedback? Well, one great way of using paper prototyping is to get people to tap and interact with the surfaces. Everyone is so aware these days of using a phone or iPad, etc. It's going to be pretty easy for users to engage with a paper prototype, and you can imagine, right? Your imagination will fill in what the real app should be. But you can see from their interactions with your paper prototypes, stuff that is awkward or stuff that doesn't make sense. You should definitely ask users for what makes sense or what doesn't. And if you can't get, because again, this is a 2-week hackathon, you can test it out with your team, right? So, or maybe family and friends that you have easy access to, because in this case, really tactily engaging with the paper prototype is super key in seeing and getting data about whether this works or not. So if you have any questions about this, definitely feel free to ask me. Any questions so far about paper prototyping? Does this make sense for most folks? Make sure I put a lot more detail into the guide doc too, some tips. Make sure to use one piece of paper. You can cut it up, but make sure to use one piece of paper per screen. That lets you easily drag and kind of more realistically emulate what it's like to engage with a real mobile screen or website. Okay, cool. Another thing I want to this is something else that's pretty cool or interesting in the world of UI UX design. It's called Fitts law. So you can read all about this. There's a ton of literature and there's ton of articles about Fitts law, but in general, what it means is that moving distances with a cursor or with a finger is going to take time, right? So you can think about it like how you interact with a website or an app yourself, right? This kind of just means make sure your buttons are big enough to click. And if there are different buttons that do different things, make sure there's enough spacing in between them so your user doesn't have to spend a ton of, basically critical thinking time making sure they're tapping the right thing and making sure that they're tapping a tiny button. Stay away from edges of the screen is generally a good advice for websites. For mobile apps, I would also encourage you to consider that. But sometimes mobile apps for app design like to have certain things like a plus button, or like if you're creating something, if you're like creating a to-do list, right? You might notice that a lot of those to-do lists have like kind of a add another button towards the bottom or the edge of the screen, just because that's where your fingers go. So keep that in mind too. And then basically try to stay away from tiny like buttons or components near the edges of screen, because that will just take a long time for users to get to. Cool. Any questions? All right, I'm going to launch a quick poll for us. This is a lot of information. Let me know if you feel like if you have any questions. Okay, we're feeling good. Okay, good. Okay, cool. Sounds good. So let's move right along. So I'm going to now introduce you to the concept of wireframing. So wireframing is one step up from sketches. So we talked about how sketches, you use pencil, you use paper, you put it on paper, right? So it's paper prototyping. Wireframing is a great tool because it lets you put it in a slightly more realistic form. Usually wireframes offer you either the website template, so it looks like a real site, or most of you are creating apps, so an app template. There are a lot of different tools that you could use for wireframing. I will run you through the steps. From our team and just from kind of our investigations, Marvel could be a really helpful tool for you. There's some other ones too, and I'll list you the pros and cons, but we'll go through Marvel. So feel free to follow these steps on your own, or maybe not quite right now, because I want to highlight to you some things that are that you should watch out for Marvel. So for instance, when you create a prototype, if you want to design with team members, you should make sure to invite your team members as you're creating an account. If you want to have separate designs and then share after, you can all create your own accounts, right? So that's something you should discuss with your team. Make sure you select an option in Marvel that basically, it says create wireframes and interfaces, because otherwise it'll take you to a very high fidelity design, which is not exactly what you want. It's basically they've created designs for you and you're unable to like make your own. And then once you get into the wireframing tool, this is really cool. This is where you get to play around. So I highly suggest everyone plays around either in your team project or just separately, because you can choose what device you're designing for. So if you're making an Android app, you choose Android, and then there's many components to choose from that are basically preset. So you can do, keyboard is an obvious one, buttons are obvious ones, drop down menus, et cetera, et cetera. So for instance, you can see my screen. I created a design here. Oh, I'm sorry, this is the wrong. Okay, I'll share this later. So this is actually I'll share this with you because this is what you shouldn't do. If you end up on a screen that looks like this, where they've given you example prototypes, feel free to flag me or send me a message, and I can help you get back to the right screen. So you don't want this because this is someone else's design that that they let you look at examples from, but you want to be able to create or upload your own designs, which is this one. Unfortunately, if you're doing a free Marvel trial, they might not let you make another one, depending on, there's a limit. So also be aware of that. Unfortunately, most of these projects are are freemium. So sorry, most of these tools, not projects, are freemium. So there's a free component and there's a paid component. So just be aware of that. There's a free trial, or there's like you get one prototype. So okay, so this is the live demo of Marvel. You can see I said clicked Android and I want to add a keyboard. Actually, so sorry. There should be. Oops. Okay. My computer's spazzing out a little bit. I'll move on, but there should be an outline of Android when I opened up Android, and now it's frozen. So I want to make sure I can get back to the slides. Okay, so I highly suggest you try out Marvel because it's like a little bit easier to manipulate and to go through the onboarding. Balsamiq, if you start working in industry, you will hear a lot of designers. Everyone knows about Balsamiq because it's a little bit older. It's like this established product. The user interface is a little bit different, it's really well known because it's been around for a long time for wireframing. We used to wireframe only with Balsamiq before these like cool new startups came out with wireframing tools. If you're using App Inventor, one interesting thing is, of course, you might already know you can drag and drop buttons into the App Inventor screen, and it's basically as if you're wireframing because the code is being implemented for you in the back end. So I strongly suggest you do paper prototyping, and if you're running out of time and you can't wireframe with Marvel or Balsamiq, try to think like your Futuremakers, right? Try to make the best decision for your timeline and project. Definitely do the paper sketches and the paper prototyping, but it's not the worst thing to drag and drop buttons in App Inventor. This isn't the thing I would recommend for best practices, ideally, but given that you have a 2-week time frame, you have to make the choices that make the most sense for your project. Speaking of, sometimes I've definitely done this a lot. If I know what I need to wireframe and I don't need to go and kind of play around with components and figure out what it looks like, all of the shapes basically in Slides or PowerPoint, you can literally create your own wireframes. I don't recommend this just because like the existing components on Marvel and Balsamiq are super useful, and they're someone else has created like the lists and the buttons and the drop downs, and they're pretty generic and pretty commonly used. And in Slides and PowerPoint, you're gonna have to create that all yourself. But if you're not using stuff like that, if your app is super different, or if your website is super different, and you find it might be easier to create the shapes and the components yourself, you can certainly do that in Slides and PowerPoint. I'm giving you this as an opportunity. Again, it depends on your project and what works for you, and chat with your team, or you can play around and figure out what you like best. But if you want to basically like go by best practices, using the existing tools, Marvel and Balsamiq, is really helpful because someone else has already set out all of these commonly used components for you. Cool. Does that make sense? Any questions on wireframing? No? So I have a question here. Does it, using Balsamiq or Marvel, does it automatically apply the layout to the app, or just a template to look off of? Oh, you're saying like, can you integrate it with something like App Inventor, or if you're using Android Studio or Swift? That's actually a great question. I'm not sure if maybe Marvel has that ability now. I know Balsamiq back in the day did not, but it wouldn't surprise me if these tools now might integrate. To be honest, I think the most likely answer is no. But I'm definitely happy to get back to you on that. So I do know Marvel has integrations with Sketch and Figma. You might have heard these terms, Sketch and Figma. They are what real designers use to create high fidelity designs. So in Sketch and Figma, you basically create exactly what your app will look like. I suggest you can look into it if you'd like. It's probably going to be too time consuming for this project, but you could certainly welcome to look into it, and I can paste links for everyone here or send out a follow-up. It's just that in companies, usually designers in Sketch and Figma, that takes multiple weeks to create designs and share that and then test that and stuff because it's really, really high fidelity. So I'm happy to get back to you if you can, if Balsamiq and Marvel automatically apply the layout. I want to say most likely not, because that's not an integration I'm familiar with, but let me double check on that. Cool. Any other questions? All right. Okay. So I'm going to move everyone to Teams again. Again, this is, not expecting that you have everything sorted out about your project, etc., but just try to experience this and try to, test out sketching and like thinking about your ideas now. Because if you have any questions, definitely, bring it up to each other, or you hop back into the main room and I'll stay in the main room or float around and ask. So I'm going to break everyone out. This will be what we'll do for the rest of today. So if there's any remaining questions, definitely let me know. If not, I will open up rooms again and you get some more time to chat with your teams about this. So again, like Tanya said in the beginning, this isn't to rush you. This is just to give you an opportunity to practice what we chatted about here. And most likely you'll probably be doing this in your projects in the next coming days, but we wanted to, really give you all of this information beforehand so that you know before you need to use it for your projects. Cool. Any questions? All right, so rooms should be open. Feel free to move to your teams. Happy sketching and chatting about designs. Feel free to type in the chat too. No? Maybe? Did anyone discuss design, or did most people do project like idea or user idea? Did anyone discuss stakeholders and values?
In our group, we were able to discuss 2 of our different project ideas and how we would implement physical or just virtual designs of them.
Awesome.
No.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, so let's see, as we wrap up today, please take this survey right now. So let's see. Yeah, so the questions are shorter, definitely heard some feedback on that. And yesterday, people's feedback was super helpful about like timeline and some questions and confusion there. So, Tanya tried to clarify that too over Slack and with your mentors. So please take a moment to take these questions right now so we can better help you as we're now halfway through, or more than halfway through actually, our computational action workshop. So you only have tomorrow and Friday, and then that's it. So you will know all about products and how to launch products after Friday, and hopefully be able to use all of that to good advantage in your Creative projects. I'm also